Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel discussion called Covering Mariupol. Lots to discuss, obviously. Let me start, obviously, by welcoming the journalists joining us on stage, Mstyslav Chernov and Vasilisa Stepanenko. Thank you very much for being with us. Now, you'll see from the program that Evgeniy Maloletka isn't with us today, which is sad for us, but great for him in a way, because he won the World Press Photo Award for 2023 with an image that's become one of the iconic ones of the war in Ukraine, which we will discuss at length, because of course, as well as a photograph, it is part of a video. Lots to discuss, but I'd like to begin the event by actually playing a trailer of a film that Mstyslav put together from a lot of the footage that, of course, was shot in Mariupol during the siege. They were the only team of journalists within Mariupol for many days of the siege. So the film hasn't officially come out yet, but it is called 20 Days in Mariupol. So if we can just start by watching the trailer now. To anyone who is following us on the live stream, for a variety of reasons, we can't show the trailer itself on the live stream, but it will of course be available publicly in the near future. Perciò regia, se possiamo far vedere il primo video.
Someone once told me, wars don't start with explosions. They start with silence.
Лично видим визуально. Танки зашли с надписью Z.
Город Мариуполь блокирован со всех сторон.
Russians have entered the city. The war has begun, and we have to tell its story.
Хорошо, что тут есть пресса. Снимайте.
This is painful to watch, but it must be painful to watch.
Вони нанесли бомбовий удар. Вон там! Хирургический корпус! Вот там вот! А, вы лучше, да? Мамочка! Не знаешь, куда бежать.
Ты чего расстраиваешься?
Не хочу, чтобы я умирала.
Репортажи ваши разошлись. Вы, конечно, огромное дело сделали.
Они столько пережили с мамами.
If the world saw everything that happened in Mariupol, it would give at least some meaning to this horror. My brain will desperately want to forget all this. But the camera will not let it happen.
I think so that trailer from the film that will come out very soon, 20 Days in Mariupol, of course, based on all the footage that was collected over that time, where Mstyslav and Vasilisa, and of course Evgeniy as well, were the only journalistic team reporting and covering the siege of Mariupol. Mstyslav, if I can start with you, we're going to get into detail into how you ended up in Mariupol and a lot of the difficulties you faced, which seem obvious. But give us just an overview, because of course you've just finished this film. You were there. It's been more than a year now since those images. Just as an overview of the film, what do you think the impact and the importance is of having something like that, as opposed to the many clips that we've seen on the news over the past months, but the importance of a film like that?
The importance to do something out of those 30 hours that we brought out from the siege of Mariupol was clear immediately, because only 30 minutes of those hours were published, and it is quite understandable that, well, even if millions of people seen those shots in the news, to really understand how it was for Ukrainians to be besieged, killed, lose their families, lose their homes. You need to give more context to people. So almost immediately, while doing our reporting on Mariupol as well, we already started with the frontline team. We already started to assemble the film, and it was immediately clear that it needs to be done. Also from a historical perspective, because we form our views about the world from the news we see, but people, the generations to come, form their views on events of the past based on films and books. Nobody looks at the newspapers of a previous century or news reports from 50 years ago.
Thank you. If we can just now look, I guess, at the chronological order of all of this happened. So, the war in Ukraine almost seemed to catch the world by surprise, or at least this phase. The war in Ukraine actually started years ago with the invasion of the East. So tell us a little bit how you and Vasilisa ended up getting into Mariupol, because of course you are reporters that work for Associated Press.
Vasilisa is a young journalist. She will tell her story, and her war reporting started with a full-scale invasion this last year. It all feels like one day. For me, the conflict reporting started 9 years ago when Russia actually invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea and invaded Donbass. And as many documentary photographers and videographers back then, the war broke out in my country and I became a war journalist. So for these 9 years, a part of covering other wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Nagorno-Karabakh and Syria, many other places. But I've always been coming back to Ukraine to keep reporting and actually fighting with this kind of, with the media space to remember that the invasion is going on. I'm not sure we ultimately did a good job reminding people all these 9 years that there was actually active invasion going on. We have to make sure that we'll do that in future if the war persists. But yeah, for these 9 years, we already kind of understood the front line. We got to know the soldiers, the dynamics of the war. So when the full-scale invasion started in 2022, we were in Donbass reporting on how people were preparing for possible invasion. And we were in Bakhmut, hence the irony. That place we were, the hotel where we stayed and the restaurant where we used to eat don't exist anymore. Everything has been bombed. Currently is being bombed too. And on the 23rd of February, it was quite clear that tomorrow probably is the day. And it was already quite clear that Mariupol is one of the key cities, tactically, strategically, economically, for Russia, is going to be one of the primary targets, and probably is going to be surrounded just because of its location and importance. And well, we didn't expect it's going to be surrounded so quickly, but we knew that we need to go there immediately because probably there will be no other chance to do it. So we drove in the night just before the invasion, and we arrived around 3 o'clock, and in 1 hour the war started. And then it just went on and on and on until now.
Vasilisa, at the time you were already a journalist, but I suppose you had worked in Ukraine but never experienced anything to this scale. So tell us a little bit about how you found yourself in Mariupol with the team, and the beginning, what was going through your mind at the very beginning.
Yes, before full-scale invasion, I worked as a local journalist in TV in Kharkiv, and I joined AP team I think, months before this full-scale invasion, and we did a story about people, how they're feeling about all this news that war could happen, and we did this assignment in Kharkiv. Yeah, then we went to the Donetsk region and worked in Bakhmut. And after that, we went to Mariupol. I remember my feeling that I really didn't believe that I will solve this war and that I will feel something and that I will become a war correspondent. I never thought about this. And yeah, when we came to Mariupol and in 1 hour we saw the Putin speech and we understood that war happening. At first, I received a lot of calls from my family, from my friends from Kharkiv, who just cried and said, what we need to do? I see these fire explosions from my window. And I didn't know what I can do, but I understood that only thing that I can do is my work. That's why we just came to the street, we started live streaming, we trying to find people, to do interviews, to find out what's going on. But on that moment, on the first day, I didn't understand that it will be so serious and that it will become a real house and real house, yes. So yeah, but the only thing that we can do as a journalist, just be the voice of these people and translating all these scenes to the whole world. And I'm really happy to be part of this team, to have this possibility to show it to a big audience to understand what's going on in Ukraine.
Well, let's show some of those images now. We're going to show 2 clips from the film. The film hasn't come out yet. Mstyslav, just talk us through a little bit. The first clip is, I guess, the tanks one, as we call it. Just tell us, just set the scene for what it is that we are going to watch.
Just I want to add a couple words to what Vasilisa said. It's quite interesting to see how, and I've been witness to that, it's quite interesting to see how this such terrible and sad and catastrophic events for the country as war or revolution give birth to a new generation of journalists. It kind of filters those who really care about their country. It filters those who are brave enough to keep reporting, and you could actually see a birth of generation of photographers and writers and videographers through these 2 stages of the Ukrainian war. About the clip we are going to see, and at what was day 14, I think. No, day 12. It was day 12 March. Yeah, day 15. Day 15th. The city was already heavily bombarded, and by this time we already knew very well the hospital where we worked and covered unfortunate death of many civilians, including children and doctors trying to save them. We slept in that hospital for a few days because that was the only place you could charge your phone and camera and laptop to edit. There was a moment when there was still some connection there in the beginning, but it wasn't already by the day we're gonna see. And we went there straight after the maternity hospital bombing, trying to find the victims of this bombing, because by that time Russia was already saying that they're actors, everything's fake, and it was just important for us to follow up with the story. But that's what journalists do generally with important stories. We follow up. We found the victims of the bombing, we spoke to them, and one of the victims gave birth to a child. And when we finished reporting, and also we found out Irina, who the pregnant woman who you see on Evgeny's photograph, which just got a world press photo, and you could see those images in the film too. Unfortunately, we found out then that she died. It was devastating news. We really hoped that she survived, but she and her child died. And while we spoke with the doctors, while we saw the birth of a child, we were leaving, and then we realized that the hospital is surrounded, and that's what we're going to see.
Okay. Perciò regia, per piacere, se possiamo far vedere il secondo clip, and just for everyone watching us on live stream.
Yeah, and also by the time we already knew that Russians are kind of targeting us, we knew that we were the only journalists that were reporting, and at this moment our names have appeared on all the Twitter accounts of official European missions, Russian diplomatic missions, calling us information terrorists. So we were kind of worried about getting caught.
Being targets.
Being caught.
Okay, so again, everyone on live stream, we won't be able to show the video on live stream, but for everyone here in the audience, regia, per piacere, il secondo clip.
We head to the exit, but it's too late. Soldiers say a sniper just shot and injured a nurse in front of the hospital.
Соблюдением максимальной мер безопасности. Дайте дорогу.
Two soldiers are still trapped.
Ты где?
За машиной сбоку.
Я тебя не вижу.
Ты вокруг, мы сейчас будем подхватывать. Тихо, тихо, тихо. Ты еще вправо до нас.
Смотри, закрыть. Объясни нормально ситуацию. Раз-два.
Секундочку. Выдохни. Я покурю. Давай. Так, заходите быстрее.
Не видел ни одного.
Заходите ли вы?
Делается. Да.
Здесь комиссар.
Делается. Ребенка не водите больше, только сами.
We hear a low rumble.
Сигнал 508.
Танк?
Не знаю, наверное. Видно, да?
Это вообще без одного и Z.
Да.
So we run to the 7th floor, to our observation point. It's risky. They can open fire at upper floors of the hospital. But from here, we can see more.
Лично видим визуально возле второй больницы. Напротив церкви, там, где стоят автобусы, танки зашли с надписью Z.
Снимай. Сейчас верну.
Сигнал. По улице Каприна еще 2 танка с надписью Z.
They are coming closer. If reinforcements don't arrive, the soldiers downstairs will not be able to stop them. They'll take over the hospital.
С той стороны, наверное, тоже пошли.
Где?
Да. Ну что, прорвались, что ли?
Не поднимается туда. Жень, голову опусти. Тут снайпер сидел, помнишь?
What should we do? We need to send all this footage. Survivors from the maternity bombing, tanks shooting at residential areas. There is no connection here, and we can't get to our car. And if we get caught, Vladimir says, Russians will make you say everything you published was a lie.
Truly remarkable footage there.
Cliffhanger.
And like you've said, you know, we have been so used in the past year and a few months to see so many clips on the news, because in fairness, the Ukraine war, maybe not to the same extent throughout, but has been at top of, you know, the news agenda, certainly here in Europe. But to see the sequence, to see it develop, you get the sense of dread. To see in one frame the tank and then its target is incredibly powerful. Mstyslav, you finished there with something really poignant. I mean, the whole thing is touching, but when you say, if they catch us, I mean, at the very least, they would take your footage, but they would get you to effectively say that it's all a lie, you know? Just tell us, as you were filming it, and it must have been obviously terrifying, just how much you were thinking of that, of the importance of what you were filming, beyond the journalism, but to get some accountability.
It was one of the first times. That is actually a very difficult thing to do, and that was done, fortunately. It was possible to do also with footage of some cameras in Bucha afterwards, to connect directly a person who is shooting and a person who is being killed, or a specific tank or APC with a Russian marking shooting at the specific direction. That's a rare thing, and also it's even more rare to actually have it shot by an international journalist, or international agency, which has rules on fact checking and. Well, that's kind of one of the roles of a professional journalism. So. Already that moment I understood that it's crucially important to get those files out, and at least to send them, but also to keep the originals with all the metadata and everything, in case there will be later there will be some investigations. And in fact, we know now that during this scene, when this tank is shooting at this house, two people are being killed who live in this house. We found people, their neighbors, who were hiding in a basement of that house, and they later witnessed that in fact this old couple was killed. Was it?
Yeah, there are two old women who stayed in the apartments where the tank shot. They can't go out because they were disabled, and they were killed in that moment. And that moment in the basement were more than 100 people hiding, and more than 15 children. So we find them, yeah, and they told us that these two women were killed, and then they buried them on the yard of this building. And now this building is planning to demolish. So.
Yeah, all this building where there are victims, most of these buildings where our victims are still buried under the rubble. They are being currently demolished or planned for demolition and turned into dust, which Russians are using to build the roads out of bones of people and their homes.
Vasilisa, earlier we were talking about your role, because now you're a camera operator in your own right, a very successful one, as we were mentioning, obviously driven by what's happening in your country. But your role then was as a field producer. And to people who don't work in television, field producers basically do everything that the journalists or cameramen don't do. So they kind of facilitate their work, and it's organizing from where you're going to sleep, what you're going to eat, but also crucially connecting back to base, sending pictures back, all sorts of things. Now, obviously, you three worked very much closely as a team. But just tell us a little bit about the difficulties of that job, and also how you became a voice. Because one of the hard things sometimes when terrible things happen as journalists, we show up and you're asking people, how do you feel, you know, to someone who's just had a tragedy befall them. Often the reaction isn't particularly pleasant, but this was not the same situation because you guys are isolated. You're the only voice in Mariupol. That makes you a target for the Russians, but also it makes you a voice. So tell us a little bit how it was, your interactions with people once they had realized that you were there telling their stories.
Yeah, I remember this moment when the connection, electricity, everything left Mariupol, and when we went through the streets and people just ran to us and saw our signed press on their vests and asked, give us some information, say us something, please. But at that moment, we had no information. At that moment, I understood that information is even much important for people than food. And I understood that now we need to help these people. Also, people were scary that they have no voice and no one could help them, no one could save them, and everyone and whole world forget about them. And I felt big pain of this. That's why we really wanted to be the voice of these people, to show their stories and give them voice, to do this corridor, to save them, and to not people forgot about them. And that's why we were near them. As my work, I remember that, yes, when we came to Mariupol, we have some strategy. We find like flat, then we find the second place to stay with a generator, with a basement. At that moment, I didn't really understood why we need it. I didn't believe that it will happen. But then generators became like really important thing for us because we needed to charge our cameras, our laptops, and also I built communications with the people. One of the most important communications that we did, it was head doctor of the hospital. Because we stayed in a hospital for some days, even for a week, and to have this access to stay, it was really hard to have this access, yeah, because doctors don't really like to stay journalists with them at that moment. But then, after all this happened, and we left Mariupol, we received calls from the doctors who said, thank you so much that you filmed it, that you were with us. And now we have these relations with them. And when we lost connection, I understood that to do like my work, yeah, with the communications becoming worse, and I just did whatever I can do to help guys with their work. And I try to help with everything, with interviews, with editing, and just to support, because we really need to support to be like a team, like one family. So that's why it was hard, but also it was great to have this team and to make it possible.
Well, you certainly were the voice of Mariupol, and as you mentioned, you came out with dozens of hours of footage, but very often there is usually one image, one sequence. that becomes iconic. And I think certainly at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, those sequences became the images out of the maternity hospital in Mariupol. So we can watch a little bit, a segment of that sequence now. And of course, from this video, that is one of the pictures. I mean, the picture doesn't come from the video, but one of the shots that won the World Press Photo Award for Evgeniy. So, regia, se possiamo far vedere il terzo video per piacere. And again, anyone watching us on live stream, apologies, but we will not be showing this on the live stream, just in the hall.
The shockwave. Ears and skin feel the change of pressure. We hide in the entryway of a building and wait for another strike, praying it will not hit us.
Здесь закрыто.
Возвращайтесь.
Да куда он сбросил?
Туда. А что там?
We go to the top of the building and see the smoke just a few blocks away. It's a hospital.
Хирургический корпус, вот там, от двухэтажное здание, где родильное раньше было. Быстрее! Вон там, аж туда едьте, быстрее, там гинеколог ждет.
Все хорошо.
Там прошли.
Куда сходить? Леруш, идем. А, вы глушите, да? Все нормально, все хорошо.
А где она, блядь, я не знаю.
Куда вы хотите?
Вопрос надо знать.
Куда? Вывели, куда дальше? Куда садиться? Машины не целые!
Девочки, потихоньку, Мама, что?
Все.
Заходите.
Тихо. Спокойно. Без паники. Осторожно. Вниз. Без паники. Выше, поднимите.
Маму дай, Куда несем?
Держись, сыграй.
Yeah, please don't. Sorry.
You can read on the news things like a maternity hospital was hit, and people still react to it. And then you can watch those images. And what I found interesting was watching the faces in the audience, actually, because often you hear about news fatigue you know, that audiences just, you can't take it anymore, you feel you can't do anything, and then people switch off. And then I was looking at the faces of the audience, and that's not news fatigue, and that's because of the power of your pictures. And I know that, you know, applause maybe, but I think, you know, that is obviously very strongly felt. I don't quite know what question to ask you off the back of it, except maybe something like, tell us what we can't see, tell us how it felt, tell us about the importance of having those pictures a year after the event.
Okay, just a couple words. I wanted to add something to what Vasilisa said before. Mariupol is the case, is an interesting case of how society really actually depends on journalism, depends on information, because we all used to criticize, well, even journalists criticize journalists and journalism in general, and now it's became a trend to criticize journalism and the work it does. But when you remove all the journalism from a 400,000 city and close it, then you actually see, and it's an important case study, then you can actually see how society collapses in a few days without journalism, without information. That's what Vasilisa said, that it's sometimes is more important than the food, that what holds society together. So that's one. And two, also journalism does an important historical job, as we understand now. These images will stay, and I'm always surprised, and it's kind of pain for me to hear, for example, 70 years later, after the Holocaust have happened, there are people who say, oh, well, never actually happened. And I can just imagine how terrible it would be if we wouldn't have those pictures, those photos from Second World War, from the camps. And so, from a historical point of view, it's just important to leave it there, to give people possibility to refer to it later. And also, now we have a luxury of not having just one image that could be taken out of context, because what is interesting is, and that proves that we live in an age of not even misinformation or a fight for images, but we live in the age of a fight for interpretation for the images. The interesting thing is that you could see these images shown on a Russian television, and as much as they were shown on the European television and then the Ukrainian one. It was just very different context given to it with the voiceover. So one of the reasons why it was important to do a film is to give people enough context to see how the images were done and what would happen before, what happened after. And more context an audience gets, less there is a possibility to misinterpret or just to manipulate with the meaning. It would be very hard to say that we were waiting somewhere behind an angle until this happens, or, you know, different things were said about our reporting. So, yes, it's not only historical evidence, but also it is context for those images that will stay in history, that photograph that Evgeniy took, that won World Press Photo. This will give a context to it. And I remember someone of the audience also, during the Sundance Festival, someone from the audience came to me and said, I will never watch news in the same way again, because now I know what happens behind the camera, or before the news clip starts and after the news clip starts. And that was something that I never intended to happen, but I'm happy that it does.
We're going to open to questions soon, but Vasilisa, I just want to give you the opportunity to say something about those pictures, which obviously, I mean, the whole thing was incredibly difficult, but that day must have been particularly harrowing.
It was painful to watch in live. I think it's also painful to watch to all people around the world. And I think if we can feel this pain, we are still human. And I hope these images and these pictures will protect us from this situation, because we need to save people, we need to save children, and we need to save family. And we are just like journalists, and we're doing our work, but if we can change something, I hope, I really believe in it. And to have this support from the whole world, to be in here, to receive now World Press photo, yeah, it means that people also feel this pain, and I hope that it will never happen, because it's so painful.
And it's happening now. Yeah, we all hope it will stop, but in fact, the same thing that happened in Mariupol happens to Bakhmut right now, Avdiivka, and happened to Popasna and Solidar and many other cities and villages. This is not over. This is happening as we speak, right now.
Mstyslav and Vasilisa, thank you both so much. I'd like to open to questions now. We've got 10 minutes. So, okay, yeah, the first gentleman at the front and then the lady there.
Journalism student from Trieste, and I wanted to ask you, how did you dealt with ethical questions, because you were shooting people who were badly injured, you know, deadly injured. How did you deal with ethics, like the fact that you were there filming such horrific footage?
It's very important to. It's a very good question. Thank you for that. It's very important to, whenever you film everything, do everything you can. First of all, then you decide what can be published or not. That's one. Two, if you publish, obviously you need to do it with maximum respect to people who you film. However, at the same time, we all have to weigh, as journalists, we all have to weigh the importance of the story and the importance for the audiences across the world to know what's really happening. It feels almost like a crime not to show such horrific events. It's just impossible not to. And I have noticed that the journalism in general have been holding back many years, and there has been, say, a care about the audience or not to show heavy toll that war does. But this year has changed something in the world journalism. Many outlets and media have started to show much more than before, and I think that happened because there's just too many war crimes or possible war crimes happening. Too much pain.
And I want to add that after this we did a big circle of investigation with the APA and APA team of investigators, and we are staying in touch with many of these people who you can see in these images, and sometimes, usually we have the feedback that they are saying thank you for this, that the story of my loved one will never be forgotten and will stay forever. So usually people respect this.
That's a part of a journalism too. Thank you. As Vasilisa, as a producer, just said, a fantastic thing here, that it's also a responsibility to follow up the stories, to try to make sure that people get help if they need to. It's not always possible. It's very difficult, especially in these conditions, but we always need to try to do that.
Next question to the lady and then other hands. Sorry, the lady over there, and then the next one to the gentleman on the left.
Hi, I'm Maria from the Brazilian Association of Investigative Journalism. I have a question to Chernov. What is the reaction from the Russians from the clips by the time AP posted last year, not the film? And I have a question for
the reactions to a film or the reaction last year?
Both, if you can comment. And Vasilia, I am pretty aware that a lot of women are in the field right now in Ukraine, covering the war, which is, I mean, I just want to hear from you from the general aspect. How did you feel? Have you ever, I mean, in terms of being a woman experience any kind of extra danger or as a target or any kind of prejudice from sources?
So the reaction was huge, and that's actually a good illustration for how important was the reporting. Like, more your reporting invokes reaction from propaganda, then that means work makes a difference. And I have experienced a very similar thing in 2014 when I filmed. I was one of the first journalists that arrived to MH17 crash when Russians shot down Boeing over Donetsk region. And there was a wave of the misinformation and different versions and reactions from Russian government. And there's something very similar happened in 2022 after the maternity hospital. Well, actually, after many other things we filmed during Mariupol. So it was not surprising at all, and but it was big. And the main tactics of usually, if you analyze the propaganda, wherever the propaganda is, it's creating a series of contradicting narratives that tend to confuse the audience. And the main point of propaganda is not to give a false version or false understanding to its viewers. It's just to confuse enough that viewers will stop seeing an obvious truth, if such thing exists. But you know, when we speak about war crimes, yes, the truth exists. It's just hard to find, but it exists. But as journalists, we don't really react on propaganda. We just do our work. We don't engage in any arguments. We just continue reporting, and that's it.
Thank you for this question, about women. And I didn't expect that I will become a war correspondent. War just came to my home, and I was in this situation. But I did decision that I need to work because, like, as doctors here, saving lives of people, journalists should work. And when war came to my home, I understood that I will work. And I had two much more experienced journalists with me, and they are men, but I also did decisions that I will be strong, I will not cry, I will focus on my work. And if something happened to me, at least I did my job, and as a journalist I did everything to have information, to show the truth to the world. And I can say that, yes, sometimes I have this reaction from people that, oh, you are small, you are a girl, you are cute, why you are working in this war? And even my family sometimes saying me, maybe it's enough, you are a girl, maybe you need to shoot. But I can't do nothing from this, because it's happening in my country. Now it's one of the most important moments in my life, in my profession, that I can stay, I can be near people and show the situation in Ukraine. So, and also I meet a lot of women now, women journalists who are covering war, and a lot of cameramen. I'm also become a camera woman, and yeah, sometimes it's hard to carry this camera, tripod, and everything, but I'm a journalist, and this is my job. So I will continue to do it, and while people need this information, I will continue to do it and stay strong and don't give up.
Never give up.
Unfortunately, I'm so sorry, but we've run out of time. Where's the floor manager? Can we go over by 1 minute? There's a yes? Okay, so then there was the gentleman on the left with the question, and apologies, but we really don't have a lot of time, but if we could, yeah.
Miller from Lead Stories, which is the most productive of the US fact-checking organizations. We deal a lot with the papugai, the parrot, Patrick Lancaster type propagandists. When you found the influencer at the hospital, We spent a lot of time debunking that because the propagandists leaped on that as, see, they're all crisis actors. Do you now, when you run into things like that, avoid reporting on or using that picture because you know it's going to be used in propaganda?
You can't avoid it because otherwise you will be told, you're avoiding something. And, why? You know? So it is, you have to find a balance. But also, it is important to understand that a year has passed from those events. And now, as things are unfolding and as we know much more about what happened, as we found much more witnesses, and we have a possibility to analyze the satellite imagery, other shots from other cameras, and it already becomes not like this person said this or that person said that. It already becomes a specific investigation with many elements to it. So yes, maybe, and all the people have right to say whatever they want. This is our basic human right to have a voice, and therefore anyone should have a voice. But when we are speaking about war crimes, potential war crimes, then obviously we need to refer to dozens of witnesses, analysis, and facts, right? So, and also have in consideration whatever everyone says. But again, there are so many elements, and that's why again the film is important, because it kind of presents more than just a voice of one person or two people, as much as possible in the film anyway.
I guess it underlines the importance of being there. You know, there's a place for analysis and there's a place for opinion, and heaven knows there's been a lot of that over the Ukraine war in the past few months, but nothing outweighs the importance of the facts and reporters being on the ground, which is really the heart of journalism. Mstyslav Chernov and Vasilisa Stepanenko, can't thank you enough for being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.